Does Elm have anything like the React component lifecycles?
Does Elm have anything like the React component lifecycles? No. So in React, you have a notion of local component state. This is essentially an object-oriented idea where you have a mutable state coupled with methods that work on that state. So components are objects. Elm actually doesn't have objects, which means that it doesn't have stateful components either. Basically, everything in Elm is derived from the application state. And when you build out your Elm application, it's a matter of slicing up that application state and passing it to plain functions. In the advanced workshop, we'll talk about specific techniques for doing that. But the short answer is, imagine if you're coming from React, what if everything was a stateless functional component? That's sort of what you have in Elm. So just like those don't have any lifecycle methods in React, in Elm, all you're working with is pure functions rather than stateful components. So there are no lifecycle methods there either.
What about CSS?
So CSS, there's a couple of ways to do it. The way that we're doing it in this application is essentially decoupled from the Elm architecture. We're just using a static style sheet. So one of the things we could choose to change in our view is a class name, for example, which could make it refer to different CSS, which would make it appear differently on the page. But there's other ways to do it sort of inline in our view function. So the Elm CSS library I mentioned earlier, that's one example of a way to incorporate your styles into the view and actually change them at runtime. So that's something like if you've ever used styled components in React, or I think Glamorous maybe also does this. Yeah, there's different ways to do it. You don't have to choose like one particular approach. CSS, there are actually a few different alternatives with different trade-offs, depending on your use case. Let's do a quick review of part 3. So first we learned about records. So here's an example of a record. It's got some syntactic differences with JavaScript objects, but also quite a bit of semantic differences. It's not just the equal sign, but it's also that they're immutable, that they don't have prototypes, they don't have this. They're just plain immutable data. We also learned about record update syntax, which essentially is a way of saying, start with this record and give me back a new record that's exactly the same as the old one, except I've changed one field or maybe a couple of fields. We learned about Booleans and all the fun different ways to combine them. And finally, we learned about the Elm architecture, including model, view, and update, and how those interact with one another to create an interactive application.